Those who lived in Nairobi during the 70s and 80s will never forget Patrick David Shaw. Patrick Shaw was Kenya's larger-than-life lawman who patrolled the streets of Nairobi through the night. He had a crazy obsession, that of hunting criminals. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 135 kgs, Shaw was an intimidating presence, a white giant who could clear a sidewalk by just stepping out of his white vintage Volvo. His name was whispered in bars, brothels, and back alleys. Shaw was a legend as well as a nightmare, depending on who you ask. Welcome to the Crime Gist. My name is Damisa, and today we talk about the legend and the shadow of Patrick Shaw. Patrick David Shaw was born in London, England on August 4, 1936. His father, a well-regarded physician, died from tuberculosis while Patrick was still a small boy. So, he grew up without that paternal anchor, raised instead by a mother who kept their family together through difficult years. School was not kind to Patrick Shaw. He was heavyset from childhood, a condition rooted in glandular disorder, and other children made sure he knew it. He was mocked relentlessly, but those who knew him then remember something that set him apart. He was never much interested in academics, but he had an extraordinary sense of justice that would go on to define everything Patrick Shaw ever did. In the summer of 1955, 19-year-old Patrick Shaw came across an advertisement in the London Times. The colonial administration in Kenya was seeking agricultural officers. For reasons that perhaps only he fully understood, Shaw applied for this job. He arrived in Kenya in 1956 to a country mid-tremor straining towards independence. Shaw was posted to the Rift Valley working in and around Eldoret. He later took on a leadership role with the Young Farmers Club. 7 years after Shaw arrived in the country, Kenya achieved independence. It's therefore safe to say that Shaw was present for both sides of that historical divide, the colonial era and the new republic that replaced it. His official work at this time was still agricultural, but his heart was elsewhere entirely. Patrick Shaw's passion was in fighting crime. In 1959, while still employed as an agricultural officer, Shaw signed on as a volunteer with the Kenya Police Reserve. This was a role that gave ordinary civilians, particularly settlers, the authority to assist with policing, carrying firearms, sharing intelligence, and running patrols. For Patrick Shaw, this felt less like a side gig and more like a calling he had been waiting for. He eventually left the agricultural job and relocated to Nairobi, where he joined the St. John Ambulance Service. That job, however, came to an abrupt end. According to the story that circulated, Shaw took an ambulance out without authorization and ended up wrecking it, leading to his dismissal. But over the years, he had retained his job as a police reservist. When he was fired from St. John Ambulance, he began fighting criminals even more relentlessly. And it was in this capacity that his reputation began to take shape. Shaw later secured a position at one of Nairobi's most respected institutions, Starehe Boys Center. He started as head of the Boy Scouts program and by 1965 rose to the position of school administrator. But his passion for crime busting stayed. By day, he was a mentor and school administrator at Starehe Boys, and by night, he was something else altogether, a relentless pursuer of the city's worst offenders. In 1971, Patrick Shaw officially became a Kenyan citizen. There's something almost cinematic about the way Patrick Shaw came to own Nairobi nights. And it started with this medical condition he had that would have defeated most people. Shaw's glandular disorder left him in a state of chronic severe obesity. He was so large that lying flat was not something his body could tolerate. And as a result, it was said that he slept no more than 2 hours at a time. The rest of the night stretched before him, empty and available. So he chose to fill it with work. His car, a white Volvo 511, had been specifically modified with a reclining driver's seat so he could catch brief moments of rest between patrols. This car became his mobile command center. In the car with him were FBI case manuals, stacks of wanted posters, and his firearm, a .38 Special. Night after night, he circled Nairobi's most dangerous neighborhoods. He chased suspects through narrow streets of Mathare, Eastlands, Pumwani, the city center corridors, and other places where the regular police wouldn't dare go. These encounters often ended in shootouts. Shaw was known to work closely with officers in the special branch and the regular police, though he often responded faster than these official units. He was almost always the first to arrive at any crime scene. His intelligence network was extraordinary. A web of informants stretched across every seedy establishment in the city. Barmaids, street boys, sex workers, petty offenders, all of them fed him information. At Starehe Boys Center, some students were referred to as quote-unquote show boys. These were students he catered to, but also used as spies. He would take these show boys to slums like Isli and Kibera and ask them to spy for him in bars and restaurants. He would tell them to go and see if so-and-so was in there, describing how the subject looked like. If the ID was positive, he would call in the reserves for backup and surround the place. Besides using these show boys to assist him in his police work and as spies, Shaw would encourage suitable students to enlist in the police, especially those who did not qualify for college. Word traveled fast in Nairobi's underworld, and Shaw became one of the most feared figures by criminals. When his white Volvo turned a corner, people scattered. Everyone knew his car's number plate by heart, KFH 845. His legend grew with every incident, every pursuit, and everybody that turned up after a confrontation with him. Shaw was also described as genuinely fast for his size. Witnesses recall watching him chase a pickpocket through downtown Nairobi in November 1986. He was able to catch the man, returning him thoroughly subdued and bloodied. It is said that Nairobi mothers developed a sharp domestic discipline strategy during this era. Behave yourself or Pat Shaw will come for you, they would tell their kids. Patrick Shaw was unmarried. He also took no vacations. Outside of his duties at Starehe and his nocturnal patrols, he had no apparent interest. His obsession was with crime, with the pursuit, the confrontation, and the elimination of thugs. Former colleagues would later estimate that in his years on the street, Shaw was involved in at least one fatal encounter per week. Patrick Shaw had become a controversial police reservist known for his vigilante style of policing. Shootouts, car chases, and more controversially, a long line of criminals who turned up dead under unclear circumstances after crossing his path. He killed very many suspected criminals, but this also raised the fear that he may have killed many innocent people as well. Shaw also had a habit that his enemies found more unsettling than his gunfire. Whenever he killed a suspect, he attended their funeral. Every single one. He would appear at graveside, that massive frame unmistakable, watching the proceedings with quiet intensity. This was just a psychological warfare conducted at the most intimate possible venue, and it worked. The message was simple and impossible to mistake. Shaw wanted the criminal underworld to know, even in death, I'm watching. He would arrest a number of mourners, including family members, for questioning. He would then proceed to warn anyone who looked suspect to never step in Nairobi or else. By the mid-70s, Patrick Shaw had been working in Kenya's criminal landscape for nearly 2 decades. Then, a man named Danson Gashui emerged. Gashui had accumulated a staggering record: 10 armed robberies, a murder, and the audacity to disarm 2 police officers at gunpoint and walk away with their machine guns. The Standard newspaper had already declared him the city's most wanted man. He also had a bad habit, taunting the police. Twice he escaped shootouts with the police, each time leaving officers embarrassed and furious. But his arrogance eventually got the better of him. Feeling invincible and in a move that would seal his fate, he issued a direct public challenge to Patrick Shaw, openly taunting him for his failure to catch him. Shaw received word of Gashui's location shortly after the challenge was issued. He found Gashui behind the wheel of a stolen Audi. What followed was a car chase through Nairobi streets, weaving dangerous, heading towards the neighborhood of South Sea. There, Gashui leapt from his vehicle and opened fire with 2 handguns simultaneously. Shaw fired only once. The bullet entered Gashui's mouth. The city's most wanted man died where he fell. But not every story from this era is straightforwardly dark. Nicholas Mwea wa Kenyonga was something rarer. His name meant loosely the one who strangles, and he lived up to the menace his name implied. He was physically imposing and adorned with dreadlocks at a time when dreadlocks in Kenya marked you immediately as someone outside the mainstream. Wakinyonga had, in his own mind, appointed himself a distributor of wealth. He was not in crime for money alone. He was in it for the thrill and perhaps the warped sense of mission. Police connected him to the theft of 330,000 shillings from a Thika bank and another 200,000 shillings stolen in Nairobi. These were big sums of money in that era. Yet, somehow, he remained beloved among Nairobi's poor. Wakinyonga had, with his stolen funds, financed the construction of affordable rental housing in Kangemi. People celebrated him. On the night of Monday, June 26, 1978, Wakinyonga was at his favorite establishment, the Nyakombani nightclub in Kangemi, buying rounds for everyone in the room. An informant in the crowd slipped away and made a phone call. Within a short time, the door opened and Patrick Shaw filled the frame. Wakinyonga looked up, assessed the situation, and refused to surrender. He instead opened fire. In the shootout that followed, several bystanders were wounded. But when the last shot echoed through the club, Wakinyonga was on the floor, bleeding out. Shaw had delivered that fatal round. Another Nairobi thug who had the misfortune of encountering Shaw was George Kamau, alias Slim. Slim was the leader of a gang calling itself the Disciples of Jesus. I know. Perhaps they just had a dark sense of humor. Who knows? He was alleged to have robbed and murdered multiple people during the late 70s and early 80s. In 1981, Slim was officially convicted of 3 separate violent crimes and sentenced to 6 years at Kamiti Prison. Before going in, he made the tactical error of threatening to kill Patrick Shaw. A month before he was set to be released, Shaw paid him a visit inside the prison walls. The message was unambiguous. Upon release, he was to leave Nairobi permanently and never return. Slim walked free and promptly went back to work in the city. It did not end well. One evening, Slim and an associate of his named Stephen Karanja were intercepted by a team of officers. They were loaded into a vehicle and driven to Karura Forest. Neither of them was ever seen again. The questions that surrounded Patrick Shaw were, in many ways, more disturbing than the crimes he was fighting. Though celebrated by some as a crime-fighting hero, others accused him of operating as Kenya's unofficial executioner. His critics were keen to note that Shaw held no rank in the formal police hierarchy. He was a reservist, a civilian volunteer, and yet he operated with the authority of someone who answered to no one. He had appointed himself the investigator, the judge, and the executioner. Due process, which underpins any justice system, was simply irrelevant to him. Shaw's methods led to controversial killings in the name of law and order. He worked with a long list of wanted individuals, but these suspects were not always arrested. Some were driven away in his Volvo and never returned, and some ended up mysteriously dead. Because official police files from that era remain limited or inaccessible, the exact number of people who died in confrontations involving Shaw is unknown, and much of it survives through oral accounts, newspaper reports, and the memories of those who lived through that period. The most conservative estimates placed his personal kill count in the hundreds. And despite these allegations of extrajudicial killings, senior officers and politicians, it seemed, found Patrick Shaw quite useful. Of all the allegations that attached themselves to Patrick Shaw's name over the years, none was more serious or more consequential than his reported involvement in the killing of Josiah Mwangi Kariuki, also known as J.M. Kariuki, in 1975. J.M. Kariuki was a member of parliament and one of the most popular political figures in Kenya at the time. He was also one of the most vocal critics of President Jomo Kenyatta's government, railing publicly against corruption, land grabbing by the elite, and the growing gap between the wealthy few and the struggling many. He was a man who spoke the language of ordinary Kenyans, and ordinary Kenyans loved him for it. Many believed he had a real path to presidency, and this made him extremely dangerous to certain people in power. In the hours before J.M. Kariuki arrived at the Nairobi Hilton Hotel on the afternoon of his death, something unusual happened. Patrick Shaw and another police reservist known as Mr. Young were seen clearing the area outside the hotel. They were dispersing the street boys, the taxi drivers, and casual observers who routinely gathered there. These are people who might otherwise have witnessed what came next. JM was last seen leaving the Hilton in the company of Ben Gethy, the then commandant of the General Service Unit. He was never seen alive again. His body was recovered days later by a Maasai herdsman in Ngong Forest. The manner of his death was horrific. His hands had been dismembered, eyes destroyed, his face was disfigured with acid, and his body was placed on an anthill. For so many years, his death remained unsolved. Then, later, a parliamentary select committee investigated the killing. Its report named senior police officials as responsible. The list of names included Ignatius Iriga Nderi, Ben Gethy, Wanyoike Dhongo, and Patrick Shaw himself, among others. But the most disappointing part is that none of these people were ever prosecuted. Another thread connecting Shaw to the political world came from an unlikely source, Yoweri Museveni, who would go on to become and remain the president of Uganda to date. In his memoir, Sowing the Mustard Seed, Museveni describes a terrifying encounter with Patrick Shaw. Museveni was, at the time, an activist operating in exile, precisely the kind of person certain authorities had reason to monitor or eliminate. According to Museveni's own account, he came within minutes of being killed by none other than the controversial Patrick Shaw. He credited his survival to his fast thinking and situational awareness. He had heard of the giant Patrick Shaw. That time, when Museveni was hiding out in Nairobi, he noticed Patrick Shaw following him, perhaps sent by his political enemies. When he went into a certain hotel, Patrick Shaw followed. He sat at a distance pretending to read a newspaper while secretly observing Museveni. Museveni said he felt he was in real danger. He pretended to go into the washroom before sneaking out of the hotel and taking a ride to Arusha that same night. He only felt safer when he crossed the border. This goes to show that Patrick Shaw's reputation preceded him even across borders. In the final months of his life, the massive frame that had anchored so many confrontations was finally failing. The man who had seemed to so many like something more than human was being brought down by the body he had carried for 52 years. On Valentine's Day, 1988, Shaw was visiting the home of a friend named David. He had been reading a newspaper doing, in other words, exactly what Patrick Shaw had always done in quiet moments, absorbing information. Then he suddenly stood up, groaned in pain, and dropped to his knees. His heart had given out. He was rushed to Nairobi Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. He was 52 years old. On Saturday, February 20th, 1988, Patrick David Shaw was laid to rest at Langata Cemetery. He was buried in an oversized teak coffin built to accommodate the frame that had defined him. At the funeral, among the mourners were pimps and thieves and sex workers. Some came to see for themselves, to confirm with their own eyes that the white giant in the Volvo was truly finally gone. And within weeks, the crime rate in Nairobi began to skyrocket again. Patrick David Shaw defies easy summary. He was a vigilante who bypassed every principle of due process and accountability. He was a loyal servant of the Kenyan state, a one-man judicial system. He was an instrument of its darkest impulses. He was probably all of these things at once. What is not in dispute is this. For roughly 3 decades, Patrick Shaw was the single most feared individual in the Kenyan criminal underworld. He operated largely alone, fueled by insomnia and obsession. But despite the blood on his hands, Patrick Shaw never faced a court. He never faced any formal inquiry. He died with his gun in its holster, reading a newspaper in the home of a friend. Perhaps that is the most unsettling part of the story. Not the deaths, not the politics, but the silence that surrounds all of it. The way a city can absorb decades of extrajudicial violence and still file it under the title legend. That's the story of Patrick David Shaw. As usual, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.